Maria Santos had lived her entire 73 years in the small farming village of San Miguel. Her weathered hands told the story of decades spent working in the fields, cooking over wood fires, and raising 7 children with barely enough food to go around. The wrinkles around her eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights worrying about how to feed her family. The drought had been merciless that year. For 8 months, the skies remained cloudless, and the earth cracked like broken pottery. The corn that once grew tall and golden in the fields now lay withered and brown. Wells that had never run dry in living memory were reduced to muddy puddles. Even the oldest villagers couldn't remember a time when nature had been so cruel. Maria's youngest daughter, Carmen, was 32 years old and had 3 small children of her own. Her husband had left 2 years earlier, unable to bear the constant struggle of poverty. He had promised to send money from the city, but the promises turned into silence and silence turned into abandonment. Now Carmen faced the impossible task of feeding her children with no husband, no job, and no hope. The family's small adobe house sat at the edge of the village, its clay walls crumbling and its tin roof full of holes that let in both rain and scorching sun. Inside, the children slept on thin mats spread across the dirt floor. Their ribs showed through their torn clothes, and their eyes had lost the sparkle that children should have. The youngest, little Diego, was only 4 years old and had stopped asking for food because he had learned that asking only brought tears to his mother's eyes. Carmen's desperation grew with each passing day. She had sold everything of value: the family's only cow, her mother's wedding ring, even the wooden chairs that her grandfather had carved by hand. The money never lasted long enough. A sack of rice would disappear in days, and then the terrible hunger would return, gnawing at their bellies like a wild animal. One scorching afternoon, as Maria sat in the shade of a dying mango tree, she noticed something unusual about her old brown skirt. She had worn this same skirt for over 20 years, mending it countless times with whatever scraps of fabric she could find. It was the only decent piece of clothing she owned, and despite its age and patches, she wore it with dignity. The skirt had belonged to her mother-in-law, Doña Isabella, who had given it to Maria as a wedding gift in 1952. Doña Isabella was a mysterious woman who had lived through the revolution and had always hinted at secrets from her past. She would often touch the skirt and smile knowingly, but whenever Maria asked about its history, the old woman would just shake her head and say, "Some things are better left buried, mija." Doña Isabella had died 10 years earlier, taking her secrets with her to the grave. But now, as Maria examined the skirt more closely, she noticed that the waistband felt unusually thick and stiff. She had always assumed it was just heavy fabric or extra padding, but something about the way it rustled when she moved made her curious. That evening, as the family gathered around their meager dinner of thin bean soup and stale tortillas, Carmen announced her desperate plan. Word had spread through the village that wealthy landowners from the next province were buying people to work on their plantations. It wasn't exactly slavery, Carmen explained, but it was close enough. Workers would be given food and shelter, in exchange for years of unpaid labor. "I heard they're paying good money up front," Carmen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enough to buy corn and beans to last months, maybe even enough to fix the roof before the rains come." Maria's blood ran cold. She had heard stories about these arrangements. Families would sell their elderly relatives, their disabled members, anyone who couldn't contribute to the household income. The buyers would take these people away, and families would rarely see them again. Some said it was better than watching loved ones starve. Others called it a sin that would curse entire bloodlines. "You can't be serious, mija," Maria said, her voice trembling. "I may be old, but I'm still your mother. I raised you, fed you, loved you. How can you even think such thoughts?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears, but her jaw was set with determination. "Look at them, Mama," she said, pointing to her sleeping children. "Look at little Diego. He's getting weaker every day. Ana hasn't smiled in weeks. They need food more than they need their grandmother." The brutal honesty of Carmen's words cut through Maria's heart like a machete through sugar cane. She knew her daughter wasn't cruel or heartless. Carmen was simply a mother watching her children waste away, willing to do anything to save them. In a world where survival meant making impossible choices, love sometimes looked like betrayal. Maria stood up slowly, her joints aching from years of hard work and poor nutrition. She walked to the small wooden cross that hung on the wall, a cross that had belonged to her own mother. She touched it gently and whispered a prayer for guidance. The moonlight streaming through the holes in the roof cast strange shadows across the room, making everything look ghostly and unreal. "If this is truly the only way," Maria said finally, "then I will do it. But promise me one thing, Carmen. Promise me you'll use the money wisely. Don't waste it on anything that won't keep these children alive." Carmen broke down sobbing, falling to her knees and clutching her mother's weathered hands. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry it has come to this. If there was any other way—" "Hush, mija," Maria said, stroking her daughter's hair. "A mother's love has no limits, and a grandmother's love is just as strong. If my sacrifice can save these babies, then it's not a sacrifice at all. It's a gift." The next morning, Carmen would walk to the village center and speak to the men who arranged these transactions. She would negotiate a price for her mother's life, just as people had once negotiated prices for livestock or bags of grain. The thought made her sick, but the alternative was watching her children starve. Neither Maria nor Carmen had any idea that hidden within the thick waistband of Maria's old brown skirt lay a secret that would change everything. Sewn carefully into the fabric, wrapped in oiled cloth and forgotten for decades, was a treasure that Doña Isabella had hidden during the most dangerous years of her life. As Maria prepared for what she believed would be her final night in the home where she had spent most of her life, she had no idea that she was literally wearing the solution to all their problems. The skirt that she planned to wear when the buyers came for her contained enough wealth to feed her family for generations. The irony was heartbreaking. The very woman they planned to sell was already carrying their salvation, hidden in plain sight, sewn into the fabric of a garment so humble that no one had ever thought to look twice at it. The morning sun rose like a ball of fire over the village of San Miguel, bringing with it the heat that would make the day almost unbearable. Maria woke before dawn, as she had done every day for the past 50 years. But this morning was different. This morning, she believed, would be her last in the little adobe house where she had raised her children and buried her husband. She moved quietly through the house, not wanting to wake the grandchildren who were still sleeping peacefully on their thin mats. Their faces looked angelic in the early morning light, and for a moment, Maria allowed herself to imagine them with full bellies and bright smiles. The thought gave her strength for what lay ahead. Carmen was already awake, sitting at the small, wooden table with her head in her hands. She had spent most of the night crying, torn between the love for her mother and the desperate need to save her children. When she heard Maria's footsteps, she looked up with eyes red and swollen from tears. "Mama, we don't have to do this," Carmen whispered, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Maybe something else will come up. Maybe the rains will come early this year." Maria sat down beside her daughter and took her weathered hands in her own. "Mija, I've lived a long life. I've seen my children grow up, I've held my grandchildren, I've loved and been loved. If God has chosen this path for me, then I must walk it with dignity." As they spoke in hushed tones, Maria felt something strange about her skirt again. The thick waistband seemed to shift slightly when she moved, making a soft rustling sound that she had never noticed before. She pressed her hand against it, feeling the unusual stiffness that she had always attributed to heavy fabric or extra padding. Carmen noticed her mother's distracted expression. "What is it, Mama? Are you feeling sick?" "It's nothing, mija," Maria replied, though her curiosity was growing stronger. "Just this old skirt. Sometimes I think there's something odd about it, but I can never figure out what." Carmen looked at the brown skirt that her mother wore almost every day. It was faded and patched in several places, but it was clean and well-maintained. Carmen remembered her grandmother Isabella always fussing over that skirt, treating it like it was made of silk instead of rough cotton. Abuela Isabella was always strange about that skirt, Carmen remembered. She used to touch it and smile like she knew a secret. Do you remember how she would never let anyone else wash it? She always did it herself, very carefully, like it might fall apart. Maria nodded thoughtfully. Your grandmother was a mysterious woman. She lived through so many difficult times, the revolution, the wars, the famines. She never talked much about those years, but sometimes I would catch her looking at old photographs with tears in her eyes. The sound of children stirring interrupted their conversation. Little Diego was the first to wake up, his thin arms reaching out for his grandmother. Maria scooped him up and held him close, feeling how light he had become. His ribs were clearly visible through his torn shirt, and his eyes seemed too large for his small face. Abuela, Diego whispered, my tummy hurts. Maria's heart broke a little more. She had nothing to give him except water and promises that food would come soon. She carried him to the small kitchen area where Carmen was trying to make breakfast. From the last handful of corn flour they had in the house, Ana, who was 7 years old, woke up next. She was Carmen's eldest child and had learned to be quiet about her hunger. She helped her little brother Roberto, who was 5, get dressed in his patched clothes. The children moved slowly, conserving their energy because they had so little food to fuel their small bodies. Mama, Ana said to Carmen, when will Papa come back? Did he forget about us? Carmen's eyes filled with tears again. She had told the children their father was working in the big city and would return soon with money and presents. She didn't have the heart to tell them that he had abandoned them completely, starting a new life with a new woman who didn't come with the burden of hungry children. Papa is working very hard to make money for us, Carmen lied gently. He'll come back when he can. As the morning progressed, Carmen prepared to walk to the village center to meet with the men who arranged the buying and selling of people. These men were not from their village but came from the wealthy provinces where large landowners needed workers for their plantations and factories. Maria insisted on coming along, even though Carmen tried to convince her to stay home with the children. If someone is going to buy me, Maria said firmly, then I should meet them face to face. I want to look them in the eyes and make sure they understand that I'm a human being, not a piece of property. They walked slowly through the dusty streets of San Miguel, passing other families who were also struggling with the drought and hunger. Children played in the dirt with sticks and stones, too weak to run and laugh as children should. Women sat in doorways mending clothes that were already more patched than original fabric. Old men gathered in whatever shade they could find, sharing stories of better times and wondering if those times would ever return. The village center was nothing more than a small plaza with a dried-up fountain in the middle and a few wooden benches under some struggling trees. Today, however, it was bustling with activity that had nothing to do with celebration or community gathering. 3 well-dressed men sat at a folding table covered with papers and a metal box full of money. They wore clean clothes, leather boots, and wide-brimmed hats that protected them from the sun. Their faces were hard and businesslike, showing no emotion as families approached them with their desperate offers. Carmen watched as the family ahead of them negotiated the sale of a teenage boy who looked strong enough to work in the fields. The boy's mother cried silently while his father counted the money with shaking hands. The boy himself stood perfectly still, his face showing no expression, as if he had already separated his soul from his body. When their turn came, one of the men looked up at Maria with cold, calculating eyes. He studied her like she was a piece of livestock, checking her teeth, her hands, her posture. Maria stood as straight as she could, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation of being inspected like an animal at market. She's old, the man said bluntly to Carmen. What can she do? Cooking, cleaning, light farm work? My mother is a good cook, Carmen replied, her voice barely steady. She can clean, mend clothes, tend gardens. She's worked hard her whole life. The man wrote something on his papers, then looked at Maria again. Can you work 12 hours a day? Can you live in a dormitory with other workers? Can you follow orders without complaining? Maria looked directly into his eyes. I can work, senor. I can follow orders. But I am still a human being with feelings and dignity. I hope your employers remember that. The man smiled without warmth. Your feelings don't matter where you're going, old woman. Only your work matters. He named a price that was lower than what Carmen had hoped for, but still enough to buy several months' worth of food for her children. Carmen's hands shook as she reached for the money, feeling like she was selling her own soul along with her mother's freedom. As the transaction was completed and papers were signed, Maria felt the strange rustling in her skirt again. This time the sound was more noticeable, as if whatever was hidden in the waistband was trying to make itself known. She pressed her hand against it again, feeling a rectangular shape that definitely wasn't just thick fabric. For a brief moment, she considered mentioning it to Carmen, but the buyers were already preparing to leave with their new human acquisitions. There would be no time for delays or investigations. Whatever secret her skirt held would have to remain a mystery, at least for now. The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. As Maria prepared to be taken away from everything she loved, she was literally wearing the key to her family's salvation, hidden just inches from her heart. The truck that would take Maria away from her family was old and rusty, with wooden sides that had been hastily built to transport human cargo. Already, 12 other people sat in the back, their faces showing the same mixture of resignation and fear that Maria felt in her heart. There were men and women of various ages, all poor, all desperate, all sold by families who had run out of options. Carmen walked beside the truck as it prepared to leave, holding Maria's hand through the wooden slats. Tears streamed down both their faces, but they tried to be strong for each other. The children had been left at home with a neighbor because Carmen couldn't bear for them to witness this moment. "Take care of yourself, Mama," Carmen whispered, squeezing her mother's weathered fingers. "I'll write to you if I can find out where they're taking you. I'll send you news about the children." "Use the money wisely, mija," Maria replied, her voice breaking. "Buy good food, not just corn and beans. Buy milk for Diego, and maybe some medicine for Roberto's cough. And remember to fix the roof before the rains come." The truck's engine coughed to life, sending black smoke into the already polluted air. Maria felt the vehicle lurch forward and Carmen had to let go of her hand. As the truck pulled away from the village plaza, Maria watched her daughter grow smaller and smaller until she was just a tiny figure waving in the distance. The journey to wherever they were going took 3 hours over bumpy dirt roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Maria sat next to an elderly man named Francisco, who told her he had been sold by his son because there wasn't enough food for everyone in the family. On her other side was a young woman named Rosa, barely 18 years old, whose parents had sold her to pay for her younger brother's medicine. "Where do you think they're taking us?" Rosa asked quietly, afraid the guards at the front of the truck might hear her. Francisco shook his head sadly. "I've heard stories about big plantations in the mountains where they grow coffee and sugarcane. The work is hard and the conditions are terrible, but at least they feed you enough to keep you alive." Maria listened to these conversations while continuing to feel the strange bulge in her skirt's waistband. Whatever was hidden there seemed to be getting more noticeable as the truck bounced along the rough roads. She began to wonder if her mother-in-law Isabella had hidden something valuable in the skirt during the dangerous times she had lived through. Isabella had been a young woman during the revolution, when bandits and soldiers would sweep through, villages taking whatever they wanted. Perhaps she had sewn money or jewelry into the skirt to keep it safe from thieves. But if that were true, why had she never told Maria about it? Why had she taken the secret to her grave? As the truck climbed higher into the mountains, the air became cooler and the landscape changed from dry, cracked earth to green hills dotted with coffee plants. Maria could see workers in the fields, bent over under the hot sun, filling baskets with coffee beans. Their movements were slow and tired, like people who had been working for many hours without rest. Finally, the truck stopped at a large gate made of iron bars and barbed wire. 2 guards with rifles checked the papers that the buyers presented, then waved the truck through. Beyond the gate lay a compound that looked more like a prison than a workplace. Long, low buildings stretched across a cleared area, their tin roofs glinting in the afternoon sun. Maria could see people moving between the buildings, all wearing the same type of rough gray clothing. There were no trees or gardens, no places of beauty or comfort. Everything was designed for work and control, not for human dignity or happiness. The truck stopped in front of a building with a sign that read, "Processing Center." The passengers were ordered out and made to stand in a line while officials checked their names against a list. Maria noticed that several of the people who had traveled with her were crying, finally realizing the full reality of what their families had done to them. A harsh-looking woman with short gray hair and cold eyes emerged from the building. She wore a uniform and carried a clipboard, and she looked at the new arrivals like they were nothing more than numbers to be processed. "Listen carefully," the woman announced in a loud voice. "My name is Supervisor Martinez. You belong to the Estrella Corporation now. You will work 6 days a week from sunrise to sunset. You will be given food, shelter, and medical care as needed to keep you productive. Any attempt to escape will result in severe punishment." She paused to let her words sink in, then continued. "You will be assigned to dormitories based on your work assignments. Men in Building 3, women in Building 4. You have 15 minutes to say goodbye to any family members. Then you will be processed and assigned your duties." Maria realized with horror that this was the last chance she would have to investigate the mystery of her skirt. Once she was processed and given the standard gray uniform, her own clothes would probably be taken away and burned or thrown out. Whatever secret Isabella had hidden would be lost forever. She looked around desperately, trying to find a private place where she could examine the waistband more closely. There was a small shed near the processing building that seemed to be used for storage. During the confusion of people saying their goodbyes and officials checking their papers, Maria managed to slip away from the group and duck behind the shed. Her hands shook as she felt along the thick waistband of her skirt, trying to find where it might open. The fabric had been sewn very carefully, but after decades of wear and washing, some of the stitches had loosened slightly. She found a small opening and worked her finger inside, feeling something hard and flat wrapped in what felt like oiled cloth. With great difficulty, she managed to work the package loose from its hiding place. It was about the size of a small book, wrapped in layers of old cloth that had been treated with some kind of oil to keep moisture out. Her heart pounded as she carefully unwrapped it, afraid of what she might find or what she might destroy through her clumsy handling. Inside the oiled cloth was something that made Maria gasp and almost drop the package. It was money, but not the kind of money she was familiar with. These were old American dollars, crisp and clean despite their age, bound together with a rubber band that had somehow remained intact after all these years. Maria had never seen so much money in one place in her entire life. She couldn't count it all quickly, but she could see that there were many bills and most of them had large numbers printed on them. Even with her limited education, she knew that this was more money than her family would see in several lifetimes of hard work. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what this meant. Isabella had been hiding a fortune in the waistband of this old skirt for decades, and now that fortune had accidentally come with Maria to what was essentially a prison. The money that could save her family and her own life was here, but she had no way to get it back to Carmen and the children. She heard voices approaching and quickly wrapped the money back up, stuffing it into the waistband of her skirt. But now she knew the truth, and that knowledge changed everything. She was not just a poor old woman who had been sold by her desperate daughter. She was a woman carrying enough wealth to buy her freedom and transform the lives of everyone she loved. The question now was what to do with this incredible discovery. How could she get word to Carmen? How could she use this money to escape from this terrible place? And how had her mother-in-law Isabella come to possess such a fortune in the first place? As Supervisor Martinez called for all new arrivals to line up for processing, Maria rejoined the group with her mind spinning with possibilities. She was no longer just another victim of poverty and desperation. She was a woman with options, even if she didn't yet know how to use them. The irony was still heartbreaking, but now it was mixed with hope. The daughter who had sold her mother for a sack of corn had unknowingly sent her away with enough money to buy 100 sacks of corn, a new house, and a completely different life. The processing center was a cold, sterile building that smelled of disinfectant and fear. Maria stood in line with the other new arrivals, trying to appear calm while her mind raced with the implications of her discovery. The fortune hidden in her skirt felt heavier now that she knew what it was, and she was terrified that someone would notice the unusual bulge or hear the soft rustling when she moved. Each person ahead of her was taken into a small room where officials recorded their information and assigned them identification numbers. Maria could hear muffled voices and the sound of papers being shuffled. When people emerged from the room, they looked even more defeated than before, as if the final traces of their humanity had been stripped away along with their names. When her turn came, Maria was escorted into the room by a guard who looked bored and impatient. Behind a metal desk sat a thin man with glasses who didn't bother to look up when she entered. He simply pointed to a chair and began asking questions in a monotone voice. Name? Maria Santos. Age? 73. Previous occupation? Housewife, farmer, mother. The man wrote everything down on a form, still not looking at her face. You've been assigned to the kitchen staff. Work begins at 5 in the morning and ends at 8 in the evening. You get Sundays off unless there's extra work needed. Any questions? Maria wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but she knew that none of them would be answered honestly. Instead, she simply shook her head and waited for whatever came next. Strip. Down to your undergarments, the man ordered, finally looking up. Your personal belongings will be stored and you'll be given a work uniform. You can reclaim your items if you're ever released. Maria's heart nearly stopped. If they took her skirt, they would take the fortune with it and she would lose her only chance to save herself and her family. She had to think quickly. Please, senor, she said, trying to make her voice sound weak and pitiful. This skirt belonged to my mother. It's the only thing I have left of her. Could I possibly keep it? I promise it won't interfere with my work. The man looked annoyed. Rules are rules. Everyone wears the same uniform, no exceptions. But it's just an old worthless skirt, Maria pleaded, touching the fabric gently. Look at it. It's patched and faded. Surely it can't be against any rules for an old woman to keep one small reminder of her dead mother. The man studied her for a moment, then looked at the skirt. It did indeed look worthless, brown, faded, and obviously well worn. He seemed to be weighing whether it was worth the trouble of enforcing this particular rule against such a pitiful old woman. Fine, he said with an exasperated sigh. But if it causes any problems or interferes with your work, it goes in storage with everything else. Understood? Yes, senor. Thank you, senor. Maria was given a gray work shirt and pants to wear over her skirt. The uniform was rough and uncomfortable, but she didn't care. The most important thing was that she still had the money hidden against her body, and now she had time to figure out how to use it. She was assigned to Dormitory 4, bed number 37. The dormitory was a long, narrow building filled with metal bunk beds and the smell of too many people living in too small a space. Most of the beds were occupied by women of various ages, all wearing the same gray uniforms and the same expression of quiet despair. Maria's bunk was near a small, dirty window that looked out toward the mountains. Her bunkmate was a middle-aged woman named Elena, who had been at the compound for 2 years. Elena had been sold by her husband when he wanted to marry a younger woman and didn't want to pay for a divorce. The work isn't the worst part, Elena explained quietly as they prepared for bed. It's the hopelessness. Most people who come here never leave. They work until they die, and then they bury you in the cemetery behind Building 7. No headstone, just a number. Has anyone ever escaped? Maria asked, trying to sound casual. Elena shook her head. The compound is surrounded by mountains and jungle. Even if you could get past the guards and the fence, you'd probably die of exposure or be killed by wild animals. Besides, they keep records of everyone's families. If you escape, they make sure your relatives pay the price. That night, as the other women slept, Maria lay awake thinking about her situation. She had the money to potentially buy her freedom, but she needed to find a way to do it without arousing suspicion. She also needed to get word to Carmen about what had happened, though she wasn't sure how to explain the miraculous appearance of such wealth. The next morning began at 5 o'clock with a loud bell that woke everyone in the compound. Maria was assigned to work in the main kitchen, peeling vegetables and washing dishes alongside 20 other women. The work was hard, and the supervisor, a cruel woman named Senora Vega, seemed to take pleasure in yelling at the workers for the smallest mistakes. During her lunch break, Maria struck up a conversation with an older man named Joaquin who worked in the maintenance department. Joaquin had been at the compound for 5 years and seemed to know everyone and everything that happened there. Joaquin, Maria said carefully. "I've been wondering about something. Do people ever buy their way out of here? I mean, if someone had money, could they pay their debt and leave?" Joaquin looked around nervously to make sure no one was listening. "Officially, no. They tell you that you're here until your family's debt is paid off, but they keep adding charges for your food, housing, and medical care. The debt never gets smaller, only bigger. But unofficially?" "Well," Joaquin whispered, "there are rumors that some of the guards can be influenced, and I've heard that Supervisor Martinez has been known to make special arrangements for people who can make it worth her while. But we're talking about serious money, not the few pesos that people might have hidden away." Maria's heart began to beat faster. What kind of serious money? Thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands. The kind of money that people like us never see. That evening, Maria carefully counted the money hidden in her skirt. It was difficult to do without being seen, but she managed to determine that there were 100 bills, each one marked with the number 1,000. Even with her limited education, she could understand that this meant $100,000. Her hands shook as she realized the magnitude of what Isabella had hidden. This wasn't just enough money to buy her freedom and feed her family. This was enough money to transform their entire lives, to buy land, to start businesses, to ensure that her grandchildren would never know hunger again. But first, she had to find a way to use it without getting herself killed in the process. The guards and supervisors at the compound were not known for their honesty or mercy. If they discovered that a seemingly poor old woman was carrying a fortune, they might simply take it and dispose of her to keep the secret safe. Maria began to formulate a plan. She would approach Supervisor Martinez privately and make her an offer, half the money in exchange for her freedom and safe passage back to her village. It was a huge amount to give up, but $50,000 would still be life-changing for her family, and it would be enough to tempt Martinez without being so much that it would seem unbelievable. The biggest challenge would be proving that she actually had the money without revealing its full amount, or how she had come to possess it. She needed to be clever, careful, and extremely lucky. As she lay in her narrow bunk that night listening to the sounds of women crying softly in the darkness, Maria whispered a prayer to her mother-in-law, Isabella. "Thank you for your secret. Doña Isabella, I don't know how you came by this fortune, but I promise I'll use it to save our family. I just hope I'm smart enough to do it without getting us all killed." The fortune that had been hidden for decades was about to change everything. But first, Maria had to survive long enough to use it. Maria spent 3 days observing Supervisor Martinez, learning her routines and trying to find the right moment to approach her. Martinez was a hard woman who ruled the compound with an iron fist, but Maria had noticed that she seemed to have expensive tastes. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed. She wore gold jewelry that caught the sunlight, and she drove a car that was much nicer than anything the other staff members could afford. These observations gave Maria hope that Martinez might indeed be open to the kind of arrangement that Joaquin had hinted at. A woman who clearly enjoyed luxury would understand the value of what Maria was offering, and she would have the authority to make it happen. On Thursday morning, Maria made her move. She approached Martinez during the supervisor's morning inspection of the kitchen, when they would have a few moments of relative privacy. "Supervisor Martinez," Maria said respectfully, keeping her voice low, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately about a personal matter." Martinez looked annoyed. "Personal matters are handled during designated times. Submit a request form and wait for an appointment." "This is about a business opportunity that might interest you," Maria continued, her heart pounding. "Something that could be very profitable for both of us." The word profitable caught Martinez's attention immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Maria more closely, trying to figure out what kind of game this old woman might be playing. "You have 5 minutes," Martinez said curtly. "My office, now." Martinez's office was in the administrative building, a space that was designed to intimidate with its metal furniture and filing cabinets full of workers' records. Martinez sat behind her desk and stared at Maria with cold, calculating eyes. "Well, what's this business opportunity you're talking about? And it better not be a waste of my time." Maria took a deep breath and pulled one of the $1,000 bills from her skirt, placing it carefully on the desk where Martinez could see it clearly. The supervisor's eyes widened slightly, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "Where did you get this?" Martinez asked, picking up the bill and examining it closely. "That's not important," Maria replied calmly. "What's important is that I have more where that came from, and I'm willing to share it with someone who can help me." Martinez set the bill down but kept her eyes fixed on it. "How much more?" "Enough to make both of us very wealthy," Maria said carefully. "I'm proposing a simple business arrangement. You help me get safely back to my village, and I give you half of what I have. No questions asked, no complications, no problems for either of us. And why should I trust that you actually have anything more than this one bill? For all I know, this could be all you have, or it could be counterfeit." Maria had anticipated this question. She reached into her skirt again and pulled out 4 more bills, spreading them on the desk like playing cards. Martinez's breathing became slightly faster as she realized that this was real money and there was clearly more of it. "This is just a small sample," Maria said quietly, "to prove that I'm serious. If you agree to help me, you'll receive $25,000 when I'm safely back in my village. That's more money than you make in 2 years of working here." Martinez picked up each bill and examined it carefully. They were all genuine, all in excellent condition despite their age. Her mind was already calculating what she could do with that kind of money. Buy a house in the city, start her own business, live comfortably for years without having to work in this miserable compound. "How do I know you won't just disappear? Once you're free? How do I know you'll actually pay me?" "Because I need to get back to my family," Maria explained. "My daughter and grandchildren are starving. They think they sold me for a few hundred pesos to buy corn. When I return with enough money to change their lives forever, don't you think they'll be curious about where it came from? I'll tell them that a kind supervisor helped me escape in exchange for half the money. It's a story that makes everyone look good." Martinez leaned back in her chair, thinking carefully. She had been looking for a way to leave this job and start a new life, but she had never had enough money saved up to make the leap. This opportunity could be exactly what she needed. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Help me get past the guards and the gate. Give me transportation to the nearest town where I can catch a bus back to my village. Provide me with civilian clothes so I don't look like an escaped worker. In return, you get more money than you've ever seen in your life." "And if I refuse?" Maria looked directly into Martinez's eyes. "Then I find another way. But I thought you might appreciate the opportunity to profit from my situation instead of just watching me work in your kitchen until I die." Martinez was quiet for several long minutes, weighing the risks and benefits. Finally, she spoke. "If I agree to this, it happens on my terms. You don't tell anyone about our arrangement, you don't contact me again after you leave, and if you ever breathe a word about what happened here, I'll make sure your family pays the price. Do you understand?" "Perfectly. The money you showed me, where is the rest of it?" "Hidden safely where only I can get to it." "When you've helped me get to town, I'll give you your payment, not before." Martinez smiled coldly. "You're smarter than you look, old woman. Very well. Meet me behind the storage shed tomorrow night at midnight. Bring the money, I'll have everything else ready." Maria felt a mixture of relief and terror as she left Martinez's office. She had set the plan in motion, but now she had to trust a woman who was known for her cruelty and greed. If Martinez decided to simply take all the money and dispose of Maria, no one would ever know what had happened to her. That night, Maria barely slept. She went over the plan again and again, trying to think of everything that could go wrong. She had counted out exactly $25,000 to give to Martinez, leaving her with $75,000 for her family. It was still an enormous fortune by their standards, enough to buy land, build a proper house, send the children to school, and ensure they never went hungry again. The next day dragged by slowly as Maria tried to act normal while working in the kitchen. She was terrified that her nervousness would give her away, but the other workers were too focused on their own misery to notice her distracted behavior. As midnight approached, Maria made her way carefully through the compound, staying in the shadows and avoiding the areas where guards made their regular patrols. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she was sure someone would hear it, but she managed to reach the storage shed without being detected. Martinez was already waiting, dressed, in dark clothes and carrying a bag. She looked nervous too, which somehow made Maria feel slightly better. At least they were both taking the same risk. "Do you have the money?" Martinez whispered. Maria pulled the carefully counted bills from her skirt and handed them over. Martinez quickly flipped through them, counting to make sure the amount was correct. "Good. Here are civilian clothes. Change quickly. I have a car waiting outside the back gate. I've arranged for the guard there to be distracted for a few minutes." Maria changed out of her gray uniform and into the simple dress and shawl that Martinez had brought. For the first time in days, she felt like a human being again, instead of a number on a work roster. "Remember our agreement," Martinez said as they prepared to leave. "You never saw me tonight. You escaped on your own. You found this money somewhere else. If anyone asks questions, you know nothing about me. I understand." They made their way silently through the compound to a small gate that Maria had never seen before. True to Martinez's word, there was no guard in sight. Beyond the gate, an old pickup truck waited with its engine running. "Get in the back and stay down," Martinez ordered. "I'll drive you to the bus station in San Rafael. From there, you're on your own." As the truck pulled away from the compound, Maria allowed herself to believe that she might actually make it home. The fortune that Isabella had hidden for decades was finally going to save their family, but first Maria had to survive the next few hours and get safely back to her village. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. The daughter who had sold her mother for the price of a sack of corn was about to discover that her mother was worth more than either of them had ever dreamed possible. The bus ride back to San Miguel took 6 hours over winding mountain roads that made Maria's stomach lurch with every turn. She clutched her bag containing the remaining $75,000, hardly believing that such wealth was real and in her possession. Every time the bus stopped to pick up passengers, she worried that someone would recognize her as an escaped worker, or that Martinez would change her mind and send people after her. But as the hours passed and no one came, for her, Maria began to allow herself to hope that she had actually succeeded. The sun was rising over the familiar landscape of her home region when the bus finally pulled into the small station at San Miguel. The drought-stricken fields and dusty streets looked exactly the same as when she had left, but everything felt different now that she carried the power to change her family's future. Maria walked slowly through the village, savoring the moment and trying to decide how to reveal her miraculous return to Carmen and the children. A few early risers recognized her and stopped to stare in amazement. Word traveled quickly in a small village, and by the time she reached her street, a small crowd was following her, whispering and pointing. Carmen was in the yard behind their house, hanging wet clothes on a line made of rope stretched between 2 posts. She had lost weight in the week since Maria had been taken away, and her face looked drawn and tired. When she heard the commotion in the street and turned to see what was happening, she dropped the wet shirt she was holding and stood frozen in shock. "Mama?" Carmen whispered, as if she couldn't trust her own eyes. "Mama? Is that really you?" Maria smiled and opened her arms. "Sí, mija. I'm home." Carmen ran to her mother and threw her arms around her, sobbing with relief and confusion. "How are you here? What happened? Did you escape? Are they coming after you?" "All of that can wait," Maria said gently. "First, I want to see my grandchildren. Are they healthy? Have you been able to feed them?" Carmen's face fell. "The money didn't last as long as I hoped. I bought corn and beans, but the prices were so high because of the drought. The children are alive, but they're still hungry. I was trying to make the last few pesos stretch until I could find work somewhere." Little Diego came running out of the house when he heard the voices, followed by Ana and Roberto. When they saw their grandmother, they screamed with joy and rushed to hug her. Maria knelt down and gathered all 3 children in her arms, feeling how thin they had become in just 1 week. "Abuela," Diego cried. "Did you bring us food? Are you going to stay this time?" "Yes, mi amor," Maria said, kissing his forehead. "Abuela is going to stay, and yes, I brought food. More food than you can imagine." Carmen looked confused. "What do you mean?" How could you bring food? And how did you get away from those people? Come inside, Maria said, standing up and taking Diego's hand. We need to talk privately, and I have something very important to show you. Once they were inside the small house with the door closed, Maria sat Carmen down at the wooden table where they had shared so many meals and conversations. The children gathered around, sensing that something important was about to happen. Carmen, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully and trust me. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a single $1,000 bill, placing it on the table where everyone could see it. Carmen stared at the money in confusion. What is this? Where did it come from? This is 1,000 American dollars, Maria explained, and I have 74 more just like it. She reached into her bag again and pulled out several more bills, spreading them across the table like she had done in Martinez's office. Carmen's face went white. Mama, what have you done? Did you steal this? Are we going to be in trouble? I didn't steal anything, mija. This money has been ours all along. It was hidden in my skirt, the brown skirt that belonged to your grandmother Isabella. She sewed it into the waistband decades ago and never told anyone about it. Maria explained everything, how she had discovered the money at the compound, how she had negotiated with Supervisor Martinez, how she had escaped and made her way home. Carmen listened in stunned silence, occasionally reaching out to touch the bills as if to make sure they were real. $75,000, Carmen repeated slowly. Mama, do you understand what this means? We could buy our own land. We could build a real house. We could send the children to school in the city. We could start a business. We could do all of those things, Maria agreed. But first, we need to be very careful about how we use this money. If we suddenly start spending large amounts, people will ask questions. We need to have a story that explains our good fortune without mentioning the truth about where it came from. They spent the next hour planning how to transform their lives without arousing suspicion. They would start slowly, buying better food and making small improvements to the house. Maria would claim that she had been released from the work compound because of her age, and that she had been given a small settlement for her time there. Over the following months, they would gradually reveal more wealth, claiming that Maria had made wise investments or that a distant relative had left them an inheritance. The key was patience and careful planning. As they talked, the children played with some of the dollar bills, marveling at the strange foreign money and asking if they could really buy candy and toys with it. Maria laughed, remembering how long it had been since she had seen them truly happy and excited about anything. Can we buy milk today? Anna asked hopefully. And maybe some meat for dinner? Yes, sweetheart, Maria said, hugging her granddaughter. We can buy milk and meat and fresh vegetables. We can buy anything you want. That afternoon, Maria and Carmen walked to the village market together, carrying some of the smaller bills that Maria had carefully selected. They bought more food than the family had seen in months: fresh chicken, vegetables, rice, beans, milk, and even some sweets for the children. The vendors were curious about Maria's return and their sudden ability to buy expensive items, but they were too grateful for the business to ask too many questions. News of Maria's escape and apparent good fortune spread through the village quickly, but the explanation she gave seemed reasonable enough to satisfy most people's curiosity. That evening, the family sat down to their first real feast in over a year. The children ate until their stomachs were round and full, laughing and talking excitedly about all the things they wanted to do now that Abuela was home and they had money for food. As Maria watched her family enjoy their meal, she thought about Isabella and the secret she had carried for so many years. She wondered what circumstances had led her mother-in-law to hide such a fortune, and why she had never used it to help her own family during difficult times. But those questions would never be answered. What mattered now was that the money had finally served its purpose, rescuing the family when they needed it most, and transforming their lives in ways they had never dared to dream. The daughter who had sold her mother for a sack of corn had unknowingly sent her away with enough wealth to feed the family for generations. The irony was complete, but it was no longer heartbreaking. Instead, it had become a miracle that would echo through their family's story for years to come. As the children fell asleep that night with full bellies for the first time in months, Maria whispered a prayer of gratitude to Isabella, wherever her spirit might be. The secret sewn into an old brown skirt had finally been revealed, and it had saved them all.